everyone, and welcome back to Advanced Java. In this video, I want to give an overview of Ubuntu, which is the Linux environment that we'll be working in. That's the virtual machine that you're using. And so I might be getting a little bit ahead of where you are. If you haven't done Lab 1 yet, you may not have the VM. But yet I didn't want to start into Lab 1 without giving a little overview of the environment. So a little bit of a chicken and egg decision here, but I'm going with showing you a preview of Ubuntu to start off with. One question that sometimes students ask, and I'm going to just get things started here in terms of logging in while I talk. So the user ID and password is student to log in. So we'll get that started here. One question students sometimes ask is, why are we using Ubuntu? And Ubuntu is a Linux environment. Employers have told us that they like it if students have a little bit of experience, not only with Windows or Mac environment, but also with a Linux environment. And in fact, in Enterprise Java, we'll be doing some stuff with Amazon Web Services, and there you'll find yourself at a Linux command line sometimes, and we'll be working with that as we're running some of our scripts for this class and interacting at the command line, similar to how we did in first semester Java. We were issuing commands at the command line. We'll be doing that here too in a Linux environment. So I think you'll find that you'll probably be running into Linux at some point in your career, whether or not it's working with servers in the cloud, or whether it might be working with a sysadmin who's working at the command line. It might be helpful to understand that, or maybe you yourself will even be working at the command line on a regular basis. So it just kind of depends on where you end up, but Linux and Unix are definitely key parts of our development environment, so you want to have some exposure to that. I think you'll find that a lot of what you've learned about operating systems is similar here. It's just a little different. So you know, oh, I know that I can change a directory or make a directory or do whatever at the command line. In this case, it's just a matter of, well, where do I go to do that? One of the first things that you might wonder about here is, well, where do I find my applications? So on the left-hand side of the screen here is the dock where the different applications, at least that I've pinned for you, are living. One thing about the updates, it's okay early in the semester to go ahead and do an update. So when you get logged in for the first time, if you want to go ahead and do the install, go ahead and do that. I'm going to remind me later so that I don't take up our time running through that. So this is kind of the first time that I'm starting up the VM, so it should look just like what you're getting when you start up. So it's okay to take those updates now. I wouldn't recommend taking too many updates or making too many changes in the middle of the semester. If you just can't help yourself, make absolutely sure that you have a good backup before you take the update, just in case. I don't anticipate anything there is going to break our environment, but it's better to be safe than to be sorry at a critical time in the semester. All right, so back to this left-hand side where our different applications are. The filing cabinet, this is like Finder in a Mac or Windows Explorer in Windows. I can click on that to navigate into my file system. So home here is kind of like the root. You can think of it sort of as, I guess on a Windows, that would be like your C drive in a way. So this matches up with a Mac because Mac is Linux Unix based, so that should match for Mac users. Most of what we'll be working with will be right in this home directory. So anything that we install will probably end up here unless we tell you to do something different, but your projects folder will be here, etc. So this is where you can find that. If you don't like this particular view, you can change the view, the icon view here. So two different options. You can change things here. So if you're familiar with Finder or Windows Explorer, this is real similar to that. You can pin items over here on the left-hand side if there's some place that you go to on a regular basis, like your projects directory or something like that. You can do that here. If you've got questions, please ask. Another thing I should say is that there's tons and tons and tons of information about Ubuntu out on the web. So if you're curious about something, tweaking the environment, you can certainly ask in Slack. You can also search for that on your own. The version of Ubuntu that we're using is 8.04. So include that in your search so that you're looking for information about the current system. Here is our terminal, so that's where we can get to the command line. And I'll talk more about the different commands that we can use there coming up in the lab. I have Atom installed here for you, as well as Visual Studio Code. So many students are using one or both of those, so you can pick whichever one you want. If you have another favorite editor that you want to install, that is absolutely fine. This is your VM. You can install whatever you would like on it. I have a couple browsers here. Slack is installed. And then I also have an application that comes with Ubuntu, which is to take a screenshot, and those for submitting assignments, that will be very, very helpful for you. So that's kind of a layout of what applications are here. If you are interested in additional applications, you can get at that here. You can kind of do a search for the various applications here. And again, you can install more stuff if you want to. Let's see, what else do I want to tell you? Oh, up here in the right-hand corner. So here we've got the current network connection. Occasionally I'll hear from students where all of a sudden you can't connect to GitHub, and then if you open a browser, in fact, you can't get to the internet at all. So you may have lost the connection here for some reason. So keep an eye on that. Maybe it got turned off. Maybe some settings got changed. Hopefully that's not the case. If that's gone completely, just restart the VM and the connection should be made again when the VM starts up. So how do we shut down the VM? So this is the power button, has a drop down here, and you'll want to make sure that when you are finished using the VM, and especially if it's on an external drive and you're going to be unplugging that, you want to make sure that you power that off and don't just suspend it. So be real careful with that. If you just unplug the hard drive, if you're using a hard drive, you can leave things in a bad state in terms of the VM, and it can end up corrupting. So be cautious with that. Be careful. Make sure that you power it down when you're finished. And then, let's see. This is probably a good time to talk about performance type tips with the VM. I've got those tips listed out on our website underneath VM performance, right on the main, kind of underneath the main menu here. So there's a list of items here if you're running into any issues. One thing is that if you feel like the VM isn't real performant, you can give the VM more memory. So up to half or even a little more of your host computer's memory. So if I'm operating on a 32 gig RAM machine, I could give up to 16 gigs to the VM. And that should be way more than enough than it needs in order to perform really well. The school lab computers are 32 gigs, I believe, across the board, so you could always give the VM 16 there. In order to do that, that's something that you'll do in VMware. This is VMware Fusion. Workstation is similar. The menu items might look just a little bit different, but if you go into settings here, and then processors and memory, you can increase the amount of memory that you're giving the VM, and you may end up adjusting that based on how much memory you have. Perhaps when you're working at home versus when you might be working at school, you can make those adjustments there. The VM does have to be shut down in order for this to take effect. So, if things aren't performing great and you want to make that change, make sure that you shut the VM down, then make that change, and then start it back up. A couple other things that students sometimes run into if the VM seems like it's not performing great. If you're going between a Mac and a Windows machine, certain formats like exFAT has not performed very well. I'm in that situation where I am using a Mac and will occasionally plug my external drive into one of the Windows machines at school. Formatting as FAT32 seems to work well, so that's something to be aware of with your external drive. Another thing, sometimes you've got a brand new SSD, it's a USB 3, it's brand new out of the box, and it still seems like it's taking a long time. Like if that VM isn't copying from the school machine to your external hard drive in, a couple of minutes, certainly 5 minutes should be about normal, I think there. If it's taking 20 minutes for that to copy, you might take a look at the cord or the cable that you're using with that VM. And in fact, if you've got somebody sitting next to you and you're like, no, they say that theirs is working fine, ask if you can just borrow their cord, or even come and find me and I'll loan you my cord, to see if it happens to be that part of the hardware that's causing an issue. It seems like some SSDs that have shipped out recently shipped with a cable that just wasn't working very well, and replacing that can sometimes work wonders. Another thing, if your hard drive fails for some reason, there are SSD drives specifically for IT students in the library that you can check out. Just make sure that you tell them that you are in an IT program and that you need to borrow an SSD. I think they let you check them out for like 30 days or something like that. Let's see, one more thing, sometimes the VM will crash, and when you go to start it back up, it won't start up. Don't panic. What usually has happened is that when the VM is running, the system locks some files, right? It's because they're in use, they're being written to. And so what can happen is that when the VM shuts down in a not normal way, those files can remain locked. And I'm just going to show you, my VM is running right now. If I look at my VM, here's the Advanced Java VM, and I take a look at that, you can see there are some files here that have an LCK extension. Those are locked files. So if I shut down, if I have a crash, if I don't shut down cleanly, those files might stay locked, and that can prevent my VM from starting back up later. So if you've shut down, if you've crashed, before you try to start up again, before the VM is running, delete those locked files, and that will allow your VM to start up okay. Now, all of that said, stuff can still happen. So please make sure that you're backing up your VM on a regular basis. And by regular basis, I mean at least weekly, so that if something happens, you haven't lost the state of your virtual machine. Now, our code, we're going to be backing up to GitHub. So you're not going to lose your code as long as you're making regular commits. And that should be several times, probably within even a half hour, an hour of working. But the VM itself, once you do some setup, maybe we've installed some additional software, we'll be doing that in upcoming units, or you've tweaked something here, maybe you added some plugins to your editor, back that stuff up so that you can quickly get back to that same state. In order to back up the VM, what I usually do is just take a copy. So let me go back to where my VMs are. I would just take a copy of this entire directory. So I've got the whole thing, and put that somewhere else, somewhere safe. Don't just copy it onto the same external drive that you're already using or onto the same computer that you're already using. Put that somewhere else so that you've got it backed up and you can get back to that point at any point in time, okay? I think many of us have been stung by not having a backup. Don't let that be you this semester, so make sure that you're doing that. I think that is it for Ubuntu. Again, if you've got questions about specifics, please toss them up into Slack. If you have had the Linux class and you've got some additional tips for working with the VM, please post those in Slack. Google is your friend there, and feel free to ask me as well. All right, that's it for now. We'll start diving into actually doing something in this environment in an upcoming lab. We'll see you next time.